This review contains spoilers, but I will warn you before we reach that point. Timestamps are also included in the video description if you want to skip ahead, and please see the end of the video for a quick message. The Bookwalker is a narrative adventure game that follows Etienne Quist, a writer turned thief. After committing a heinous crime, Etienne is sentenced to 30 years of writer's block with the chance of reducing his sentence to a measly 28 years provided he's on good behavior. This doesn't last long, however, as Etienne receives an offer to remove his shackles in exchange for entering the worlds of books and stealing powerful artifacts for a mysterious benefactor in the real world. We follow this desperation-fueled adventure through 6 unique books and an epilogue. Developed by Do My Best Studios, a Russian independent game development studio founded by Oleg Sergeyev and Andrei Rumak, the pair debuted their first game, The Final Station, in 2016. The visuals for this game are absolutely splendid. Congratulations, art direction. The game is primarily a third-person perspective viewed from an isometric angle. They've done a really good job of setting the scene and making the playable environments feel occupied and lived in. Every book is unique and beautifully illustrated in 3D environments. The character portraits for the NPCs you speak with are amazing, each one unique. I love everything about the visuals in this game. A side note related to visuals is the interior of Etienne's apartment. As the game progresses, you notice the very abrupt changes in the environment to represent Etienne. The additions of new furniture when he succeeds his jobs, and the trash and beer bottles that accumulate when he's failed one. This is a good example of show, don't tell. Moving on to the music. The latent powers of music and sound are fully utilized in this game. Every environment has a song and ambient noise that adds to the layers of immersion. The calming piano of the quiet and empty cell block contrasts greatly with the bass-bumping battle music. As you explore the alchemist's area, I can only describe the music as airy and mystical, which again contrasts with the more intense music that begins when you finally escape and chase after the alchemist. The use of ambient sound in the real world is incredible too. You hear the birds chirping as you wake up. As you check the mail slot for your next eviction notice, you can hear your neighbors using the microwave, nailing something to the wall, kids running up and down the hall. The sounds play over and over again every time you leave your apartment, but you're not in the real world often enough for it to get that annoying. I won't waste much more time on sound, so I'll keep it brief. The rest of the chapter's music is good and just as unique as the visuals. Every chapter's music maintains this airy and mystical energy to it, adding to the fantastical feeling. Nearly every object and item you interact with has such a convincing sound effect to it, sometimes they give you a black screen to imagine the cutscene yourself. Before I begin this segment, if you plan to play this game at some point, you should close the video now. The main draw to this game is the narrative. It's not worth playing once you know what happens. If you wish to keep watching but skip the story spoilers, go to the time shown on screen now. We begin as most stories do, with the first chapter. Using his powers as a writer, Etienne enters the text A Drop of Infinity in pursuit of the elixir of immortality. He finds himself in a jail cell block full of cells containing the skeletons of previous guinea pigs of the elixir. Science is about trial and error, after all. Upon exiting the first room, you spot a corpse. With him is your new best friend in a can. He doesn't know what happened to his last partner, and at no point does he elaborate, so just to be safe, Etienne decides to take the can with him and name it Roderick. Upon closer inspection of the can, it turns out to be a cage. In fact, it's a cage made out of the same material as Etienne's handcuffs, the very ones causing his writer's block. Even weirder still, the cage houses a sentient sheet of paper that we know to be Roderick. Further down the room, we see a key on a grate. This key is important. It's important for the fact that it is one of the first decisions we get to make in the game. You see steam coming up from the vent where the key rests. Do you grab the key, or do you touch it with one finger? In the clip you're seeing, I decide to grab the key and Etienne takes a point of damage and the key falls. Consequences! Choices in games are always better when they have consequences. In my first playthrough here, I touched the key with one finger. Etienne took no damage, but the key still fell. So in reality, the end result is the same, but the illusion of choice is a powerful tool when it's used correctly. I enjoy the fact that one of the first decisions you make has consequences, as this sets a precedent for the rest of the game. Climbing down the ladder to the floor below, you find the key on yet another grate. Etienne hesitates to reach for the key for fear of it being hot, but also hesitates to reach for it at Roderick's word. This interaction with Roderick was my favorite in the entire game because I had no idea if I could trust him yet, and that made the decision feel like it held so much more weight. After this point, it becomes clear that Roderick is helpful in every scenario, and that disappointed me a little as I progressed through the game. I wish the developers, developed the mystery of Roderick a little more, but of course, it's in Roderick's best interest to cooperate with Etienne. So regardless of what you choose, when Etienne reaches for the key, it will fall below once again. To reach this area, you must craft a crowbar. This was the first instance of pixel hunting for me. Once you find the materials and make your crowbar, you climb down and find a grate in the wall and a doorway. In this grate, you see a gem and get the first prompt for using ink to manipulate the literary world around you. The game mentions that the ink is your blood and it hurts to use. With this ink, you bend the bars just enough to grab the gem. This here also sets another precedent, but again, more on that later. Continuing, you get the key and run back up to unlock the door to get out, right? Wrong, it's alchemy puzzle time. After making some acid, you can skim through the alchemist's emails and search history to find out his true love is from 700 years in the past. So that must be why he's been developing the elixir to make everlasting life, right? Wait, that must also mean the alchemist is from 700 years ago. That would help explain the obvious juxtaposition we see throughout his labs. As you continue exploring, you find the alchemist's latest test subject tied to a chair full of holes but still breathing. As you investigate the room, you discover the alchemist got tired of using a blade to test his subjects by hand and opted for the efficient use of a gun. Except with this test subject, one shot wasn't enough. He shot him repeatedly to make sure his elixir truly worked. Yikes. To his credit though, the subject is still alive. A broken wall, some spiders, and 2 dead guys later, you find yourself on the tail of the alchemist as he hops in a car and takes off. In classic Etienne fashion, he steals a cab from the driver no matter what choice you pick and chases after the alchemist. Cut to black and you hear the sounds of a crash. When the camera reappears, Etienne is faced with a dilemma as he watches the mangled alchemist crawl to the cemetery, crying the name of his beloved he hopes to revive with his elixir. Does Etienne chance his only opportunity of removing his shackles by sharing this potion? Or does he take it all as per the contract? The alchemist is a bad man, right? He tested on and killed who knows how many people, not to mention those 2 men we saw dead ourselves. But then again, what gives us the right to take their life? Wait, he's a character from a story. Is he even really alive? Well, he breaks bones and feels pain like a person. He feels love and longing like a person. You could keep going, but I think I made my point about the ethical dilemma. If you take the whole bottle, you break the cycle of the book, but you really please the boss man who says, "Good job, sport, now get out there and do it again." If you choose to share the elixir, however, In a stroke of genius, Etienne puts half in a soda bottle and lets the alchemist keep the real bottle. Why didn't he take the real bottle? That would have been way more convincing. As you would expect, Etienne's benefactor realizes that it's only half the potion and gives him an earful over the phone. Despite this major disruption, he offers Etienne the next job anyway. Chapter 2, The Spark of a Hammer. More like Spark of a Genocide. This chapter takes us to a nice, cozy mountaintop where Thor runs, or used to run, a power plant. Entering the grounds of the plant, you find a massacre of robots, one with an axe stuck in its head. After inserting a battery for him, you have to kill the poor guy a second time because whatever you choose doesn't matter. Obviously, ink won't work, so I tried using the robot's name, which seemed to me like would be the real solution. I disliked this chapter, so I felt no desire to see if pretending to be a robot would work, and I hypothesized that it won't. This interaction feels pointless. It's like a punishment to the player for interacting with something you so obviously wanted them to interact with. Speaking of punishment, why do you have to remove and insert the batteries individually? This was really frustrating when I had to explore the areas of this chapter multiple times to find the items that I required for progress. After that funness, it's time to head back to the real world to attempt to rob your senile neighbor again. Instead, Etienne settles for stealing a communal shovel. After saving this robot's life, it's time to take it again. The chapter really emphasizes the point from the first chapter. Odd how Etienne shows more remorse for the robots than he did the alchemist. I guess it is worse that these guys scream in pain. Moving on from robot homicide, as you enter the plant, you're faced with a time-wasting puzzle. A normal person would probably have read the manuals and understood this puzzle the first time. I tried legitimately the first few attempts, but I had become burnt out at this point, having spent about 45 minutes in the beginning areas. So I just clicked random things until something worked. The puzzle delivers the necessary item to progress, and you move on. Read some literature inside a burning office, then come face to face with the angry mob that performed the before-mentioned robot genocide. Turns out that they're here to stop Thor's hammer because the mighty hammer is causing avalanches that are wiping out villages. It might be possible to talk your way through the mob, but I had no success and I had to fight them. I tried my best, but I lost the fight, to which they suddenly decide to let Etienne try the door now. I guess they think they took Etienne the first time and they can take him again if he tries anything funny. Regardless, you get through the door and out with the hammer. End scene. Chapter 3, The Cornelius Paradox. A not so subtle nod to Harry Potter. Well, maybe it isn't, I'm just seeing some parallels. The special wand, wizarding school, the different houses, talk about purity of blood, the old headmaster, and the problematic student that looks a lot like Draco Malfoy. Anyway, we drop into the entrance of the school and enter under the disguise of a janitor. Finishing up in the library, we make our way to the main hall. Just to clean the glass around the wand, that's all. When suddenly, Etienne gets spotted by a wand-wielding man. This was another interaction I really enjoyed with Roderick because I'm torn between surrendering because I don't know what this wizard is capable of, and smashing the glass and grabbing the wand like Roderick suggested. I ended up surrendering here because I feel like the glass would have had some magic charm or something that Etienne wouldn't be able to break anyway. You get brought into the headmaster's offices and learn that magic is dying in this world. In the sky there are symbols, and every so often a symbol breaks and the associated magic no longer exists. This prestigious school has reached a point in time where magic can't keep ahead of modernity anymore. Technology has caught up, and the old headmaster is doing everything he can to reject progress and maintain the ancient ways of magic as best he can. The modern world has infected a school, with fewer magic-blooded people and a second headmaster who wants to teach his students about the modern world and hold a job to contribute to the economy. Back in my day, we taught our students Wingardium Leviosa and Avada Kedavra. Nowadays, all these sissies want to learn about is programming. You also learn this wand is important because no one knows what spell is stored inside of it. Cornelius died the moment he went to cast a spell, and no one knows if he meant to destroy the world or save it, or if it just makes a fart noise. For this reason, it remains under lock and key. As you listen to the two headmasters argue, the wand you came here to steal gets stolen by someone else, and it's up to you, the janitor, to investigate. As you search the school, you come across a few minor interactions. This girl locks her friends in a secret passage to feed them to zombies. This guy is totally an adult and he wants booze. This kid just wants to run away. And this girl is looking for a cure for her dad, and you can find him, but no, you can't help. Once you finish all these B stories, the culprit finally appears in the attic with the headmasters in tow. You chase after them. They argue back and forth about the same rejecting modernity. Draco Malfoy turns out to be the thief, which, by the way, I was suspicious of him the entire time. Only important characters get portraits, and he kept asking if we had found anything out about the case. He's standing in a glowing light, for crying out loud. Anyway, Malfoy curses the old man for clinging to the illusion that magic is still around us. You get 4 choices here for what to do, but none felt like they actually would have worked, so I attempted to use ink. I thought if any time was the time to use it, it's now. Instead, it fails and the kid snaps the wand in half. I never came back to try this chapter again. It didn't feel worth playing through again to see if other choices would change anything. Etienne takes the pieces of the wand and hands them over. Needless to say, the boss isn't pleased this time. I took a wild guess from all the beer bottles around the room and the bar tab on the door. Chapter 4, Black River Drifters. The title of this chapter is a little bit misleading. There are no rivers to drift through, just space. Etienne lands himself in a futuristic King Arthur spaceship run by artificial intelligence. Yep, you heard me right. Upon landing, you're confronted by this supercomputer that indoctrinates you into its ship's crew on its journey to find the worthy, the one who will pull the sword from the stone kept on the top floor. Familiar story, right? Playing along for now, Etienne follows the computer's orders in order to prove himself worthy of ascending. Does that sound familiar too? The following puzzles aren't interesting to play or to talk about. It's just finding the item to use on the thing. One thing must be done before the next thing can happen, so it's very straightforward. At one point, you wake to the real world to yet again steal from your neighbor, this time a pickaxe. As you progress to learn the truth of the ship, it comes to light that these people are sacrificing themselves for the cause that they believe in. But rather than dying for the cause, they live just to fuel it. Literally. I don't know if it's the prayers that they say, or if it's their life force being sucked out of them, but each pod generates canisters of faith, and this faith fuels the ship's entire journey. You also learn that this AI claims to speak for the worthy, and that its orders are his. How can that be if even it doesn't know who the worthy is? Fast forwarding to solving the final puzzle that teaches you the ultimate truth that will allow you to ascend to the top level, you get confronted by the main computer to change the ship's course to return to Earth. You can deny or accept. I chose to accept, but that didn't matter as it led to combat anyway. I get it. You spent all this time building a boss fight and setting the scene. It doesn't defeat the fact that this AI was unable to detect Etienne's entry into the book and more so the ship. So, Etienne should be able to walk up to the sword and the stone and leave before the computer notices when he makes it to the top floor. Regardless, after kicking GLaDOS' ass in a rematch, you make your way to the main cabin of the ship and to the sword. Time ticking and pickaxe picking, you crack the sword out of the stone, or well, most of it, and narrowly escape. Chapter 5, Timeless Mansion. This one is a doozy, folks, so strap in. I think this chapter is my favorite, narratively speaking. We're going to take this one quickly, as it's mostly an exposition dump with puzzles that make you travel through time, so I'm just sticking to the plot. This book takes us to a world with what appears to be a haunted mansion. Approaching the house, the cellar doors open and out runs a girl screaming she trapped the monster in the basement. This girl isn't from this house, she broke in and entered to steal because it looked abandoned. Moving on, you find the monster, the lord of the house, locked in a cage in the basement. He immediately recognizes Etienne and demands to know what he did with his wife Amanda. This feels like an excerpt from The Young and the Restless except for the blood on the floor. Ignoring the crazy man in the basement, you find the clock you're looking for, only it's missing some of its components. I actually really enjoyed this puzzle with just a couple shortcomings. You're required to go back and forth in time in this house to find where these components might be hidden in different times. This became a little frustrating as I had to hop from one time to another time several times because I had some trouble finding things. Throughout this chapter, you learn that this book was originally written by Etienne himself. He's spoken in the past that characters aren't actually alive, and Roderick jokes that Etienne must be the best at writing characters then if everyone else's characters aren't quote-unquote alive enough. As he wrote this book about a clockmaker and his wife, and developed these characters as people, he began to fall in love with Amanda. It isn't said directly, but inferred that Etienne entered the book on at least one occasion to spend time with Amanda, as the Lord had seen them together. If Etienne can enter books with his shackles, it stands to reason that he would be able to beforehand. Finally, Etienne breaks and he must be with Amanda, so he brings her out of the book and into the real world. This was the unspeakable crime the game had been referring to all along. The only crime greater than stealing items from books and putting them in other books, referred to as plagiarism and what Etienne has been facilitating this entire time, is bringing a book character into the real world. After he was caught, the rights to his book were sold to some publisher who had someone take over the book, and they turned it into a horror. Maybe that's appropriate given the book's history. It got glowing reviews after all. This change of hands is depicted visually in the book as well. In the past, it's Etienne's, and in the present and future, it's the decayed version the new author had turned it into. Only after defeating the Lord, a character of Etienne's own creation, can he get the final gear to fix the clock and return to the real world. Chapter 6, Heart of Sand. This time, Etienne lands himself in a desert storm. Not that one. Aboard a train, you get a call from the late conductor's radio warning of a death storm rolling in. He says the old meteorologist has died, so no one is able to predict the weather. After commandeering this train from the victim of a vegan diet, expert mechanic Etienne jumps into action to fix the train and make it into town to safety. It must be all these books that he's read. Upon making it into town, the gate is blocked by a man who fell victim to a fear storm. I was a little aggressive in my approach, but the guard was no help, so he has no right to complain. He could have grabbed him. After going through customs, you enter the town next to a wall of hourglasses, each indicating how much time each person has left in town before they must leave. That's pretty ominous, and a wicked metaphor about wealth and capitalism, as the red sand in the hourglasses is the town's currency. You buy and exchange in sands so that you can stay in town, and in safety, longer. After some time, you learn that the meteorologist is in the upper district, and there's no entrance for train drivers. That's an interesting thought that doesn't really get explained. How do the drivers get chosen? The fact there's an upper district means that not everyone is subject to putting themselves outside to possibly brave these storms. So do they get Hunger Games into it or something? I don't know, and it's not necessary for the story that we're following, but I wonder. And that's how I know that they've created a good narrative and environment. Getting back on track, pun intended, you discover that there's a woman in charge of scrapping electronics who made no way to get in. I wonder what it could be. So, she sends you to a man named Mr. Nariano who extorts you for all of your sand in exchange for entry in his secret pass. You aren't going to need it anymore anyway, so after handing it over, he says to report back to the woman and give her 2 bags of sand. Upon doing so, she opens the door. That's pretty darn scummy. After she opens the door to the sewer, she says trust a bag of bricks, and Etienne enters into a sequence of events. I call it a sequence because I don't really know what else to call it. It's not a puzzle to solve, it's unclear or arbitrary choices that may punish you for seemingly no reason. The first step, you obviously know to step on the bag of bricks because that's what she just literally told you to do. The second step is anyone's guess but mine apparently. How am I supposed to gauge how long to wait to jump when all I can see is a black screen? It would have worked better if you put a second bag of bricks there so the player doesn't get punished for no reason. Sneaking into the upper district, you immediately get hit with a joy storm that shows everyone a dream of the things that they wish for most. For Etienne, it was having his family around him again, of which we get no other mention. Outside the meteorologist's home is his wife attempting to sell his gadgets to make ends meet. She demands 100 bags of sand for the weather controller that Etienne is after. After causing a scene of being a total Karen over prices, Etienne gets knocked unconscious and left in the desert. Thief and breaking and entering expert Etienne sneaks his way back into the city through another sewer entrance. Using his ink powers to break metal bars, he finds the scientist's wife about to sell the controller to Mr. Neriano. At the sound of a death storm warning, Neriano knocks Etienne unconscious to get away with the controller. Chasing after and returning the favor in kind, Etienne gets the device just in time to stop the storm. At this point, the final job, the game gives you the option to leave the device here or take it with you. I opted to take it with me with a half-hearted attempt to calm the people and have them believe in the meteorologist's son. Finally. 6 jobs done. This is finally it. So it seems that the big decision you got to make at the end of Chapter 6 didn't mean anything. After committing self-defense, Etienne divides by 0 and jumps into a book within a book. Here we see a drastic change. It's obvious that something isn't right, and when the bass hits, it gives me goosebumps. Gives, as it still did during editing this video. Looking around at the briefcases, we realize we're in the collector's domain. In the classic Etienne fashion, he steals the artifacts out of some of the cases to bring with him, prepared for a showdown. That's how you know shit is getting serious. I won't spoil everything, so I'll just say they really spiced up combat by giving the enemies new abilities and letting the player find and use artifacts. On one hand, it is really cool to be able to see the items brought in by other thieves, but I do wish we got to see at least one of the artifacts that I brought in. Slugging his way through all the goons, Etienne makes his way to the big boss's office. Surprise, big twist, the boss can't remove the shackles, but use the promise to in order to control Etienne. Further twist, the boss is actually a character? Now knowing this, Etienne uses his special move, committing the greatest crime in writer's history, that is removing a character from their book. It is very neat that we get to see the technique he used to bring Amanda out too. The collector, backed into a corner, doesn't respond well as the police show up. He shoots Roderick, and Etienne makes his escape, unwilling to waver on the promise that he made to his friend. After seeing his friend back where he belongs, old man Etienne returns to the real world to do what he set out to do from the beginning. Right again. The combat works, but the game could do without it. I do really enjoy turn-based combat. I just don't think the addition of combat improved this game in particular. It might have been better off just being a narrative puzzle game with better puzzles, as the narrative is the real driving force. Having said that, the fights during the epilogue were a fun opportunity to kick some ass. The crafting, however, can definitely be removed. In fact, I'll be offended if a sequel has crafting. By the time I've hunted for the one resource I'm missing, I've forgotten the emotional impact of the last story beat. If the rest of the dialogue and events are scripted, why are crafting materials the only thing you can possibly miss? It makes the story flow about as well as a river of spoiled milk. Why does using ink only hurt outside of combat? Why does it not hurt when it's convenient for the plot? It would have been awesome to be able to use the ink to manipulate the environment more. What if we got rid of ink hurting entirely and the cuffs are the reason for a limited amount? Either get rid of the ability to craft ink jars or get rid of the ability to drain ink so it becomes more valuable. Remove ink as a combat resource and instead as something you can influence the world with. What is Etienne's real motivation? It seems like he's only self-interested. He wants his shackles off because they inhibit his abilities as a writer. There's nothing inherently wrong with being self-motivated, but it can be a little shallow. How did he meet Vince, the person who set him up with the Collector in the first place? How did the Collector learn about Etienne? What about not seeing his family for the next 28 years? He mentions them once. It basically says they're already no longer in his life. Here's a thought. What if the Collector learns Etienne is an esteemed author and makes him write a book to create the ultimate weapon, but Etienne already has his cuffs and can't create anything himself? So that's when the Collector makes him enter other books instead. That would make sense why he would get a random phone call. But perhaps the Collector just simply searched police records to find someone desperate who would do anything to get their cuffs off. Who even is the Collector? What is he? After finishing the game, writing, and editing, I still don't really understand if he's a real person or actually a character. If he's a character, how did he find out he's a character and gain influence in the real world to begin stealing items from other books? Unless someone is behind the Collector, someone who would have had to write his character. Someone bigger who is using a fictional character to take the fall. But then again, how would the police officer have been able to recognize him and say his name? At no point does anyone say what book the Collector is from. As he's being caught, he demands his book, but it's not clear if it's his by possession or his because he's from it. Final thought, I've been seeing a few reviews on YouTube of people comparing the book Walker with Disco Elysium. This comparison bothers me. Disco Elysium is a lot more in-depth, with branching storylines, different endings, game mechanics that drastically change the way your character interacts with the world, and there's a lot of variety in how to do that, and, most importantly, actually impactful choices. Okay, what about similarities? They're both point-and-click narrative adventure games. That's where the similarities end. You can compare apples to oranges, but they're still two distinct fruits. In my opinion, the book Walker is a good game. The story is engaging and interesting, though it's not enough to attract new players from different genres of games. Despite the horrible things that I said about crafting, I still highly recommend that you play this game and experience the story for yourself. You can play it on Steam, Epic, or GOG on PC, and for console, it's available on both Xbox and PlayStation. If you have Xbox Game Pass, it's also available on PC and console. This was how I played. And I'd like to give a special congratulations to Oleg Sergeev and Andrei Rumak at Do My Best Game Studio. 6 years of hard work. I'm glad to have experienced it, and I look forward to the games you create in the future. Though unlikely, I hope that this video reaches you. Thank you so much for watching. This is my first video and I did spend a lot of time on it. So if you enjoyed, I'd appreciate a like and leave a comment if you have some feedback or a future review suggestion. Until next time.